Do you believe in forgiving or forgetting?
Imagine winning enough money to transform your entire existence. $25 million secured in a hidden account that no one in your world even suspects exists. Yet instead of rushing out to purchase that long-dreamed-of house by the lake or booking a spontaneous flight to Hawaii for a taste of paradise, you choose to embark on a perilous experiment by fabricating a complete financial downfall, pretending to scrape by on instant noodles and desperate hopes just to observe which individuals in your life, those family members and friends for whom you have sacrificed so much over the years, would extend a genuine hand of support without hesitation, only to discover that nearly everyone turns away in indifference while a single unexpected person emerges as the sole beacon of true compassion, ultimately reshaping your understanding of loyalty in ways that linger long after the story concludes, compelling you to scrutinize every connection in your own life with newfound skepticism and introspection. My name is Sarah Jenkins, and life in this quiet corner of Ohio has always possessed a relentless capacity to wear down even the most resilient spirits if one fails to guard against its subtle erosions, especially for someone like me who turned 45 just last spring after enduring a divorce 5 years prior when my husband abruptly departed with a younger woman from his accounting firm, abandoning me not only emotionally, but also with a mountain of unresolved debts and a modest two-bedroom house that often feels oppressively spacious during those solitary evenings when memories crowd in uninvited. As an accountant at a local firm where I spend my days meticulously balancing ledgers for clients who fancy themselves clever manipulators of the financial system, my routine provides a semblance of stability, though it frequently prompts quiet reflections on the elusive nature of fortune and whether true change ever arrives without strings attached. The pivotal moment unfolded on an ordinary Tuesday evening following a typically exhausting shift, when I pulled into the familiar gas station lot out of habit and purchased a single ticket for the National Lottery drawing that had been hyped across every billboard and television commercial for weeks, a ritual I had maintained sporadically despite never claiming more than a complimentary coffee as a prize, clinging to those inexpensive fantasies as a brief escape from the grind of unpaid overtime and household repairs that never seemed to end. Later that night, while reheating a solitary portion of yesterday's casserole in the microwave, I pulled out my phone to verify the winning numbers out of idle curiosity, beginning with a casual glance that quickly escalated into disbelief as the matches accumulated one by one until the final digit confirmed an unimaginable reality. I had secured the entire jackpot of $25 million, causing my hands to tremble uncontrollably and my pulse to race as if I had just completed a grueling marathon without training. Yet in that suspended moment of shock, I found myself fixated on the screen for what must have been a full hour, grappling with the weight of this secret windfall that promised liberation, but also carried the shadow of potential ruin if mishandled. Determined to shield this life-altering event from immediate scrutiny, I refrained from sharing the news with anyone, not my sister Lisa, who lives just 20 minutes away in a bustling home with her husband and 2 energetic teenagers, perpetually sharing glossy updates of family outings on social media while subtly implying she could always benefit from a little extra assistance, not my brother Mark, the perpetual dreamer with his expanding waistline and garage cluttered by unfinished renovation projects that drain more resources than they ever yield, and certainly not Jenna, my closest confidant since our high school days when we exchanged whispered secrets beneath the football stadium bleachers during Friday night games. A bond that has weathered countless personal storms, yet occasionally felt one-sided in its demands. The decision to maintain silence stemmed from hard-earned lessons accumulated over decades of observing how sudden wealth, or even the mere suggestion of it, could warp relationships into something unrecognizable, transforming trusted allies into opportunistic strangers faster than a poorly chosen hair color could fade under the harsh Midwest sun. With careful planning, I traveled to a discreet lawyer in Columbus the following week to handle the claim process, establishing intricate trusts and investment vehicles designed to obscure the funds from prying eyes and ensure long-term security without drawing attention through extravagant purchases or lifestyle shifts that might invite gossip in our tight-knit community where Rumors spread like wildfire through church potlucks and neighborhood barbecues. However, rather than reveling in this newfound freedom by splurging on luxuries or retiring to a sunnier locale, a darker impulse took root within me, born from years of extending quiet support to those around me. Covering Lisa's impulsive ventures into failed small businesses that promised quick riches but delivered only setbacks, absorbing Mark's frequent financial shortfalls from his unstable jobs at the local auto repair shop without ever demanding repayment, and providing Jenna an unwavering ear for her endless tales of romantic disappointments while she rarely reciprocated with tangible aid during my own moments of vulnerability. What, I wondered in the quiet hours after midnight, would happen if the dynamics reversed and I appeared to need their help more than ever? Would their loyalty endure without the incentive of reciprocity? Or would self-interest reveal the fragile foundations of our connections? Thus, I devised a calculated strategy to test the depths of their commitment by subtly simulating a cascade of professional and personal hardships. Beginning with fabricated indicators of trouble at the office, such as invented client losses and delayed paychecks that I could reference in casual conversations without arousing immediate suspicion, all while monitoring their responses to gauge the authenticity of our bonds in the face of apparent adversity. The initial foray involved a phone call to Lisa on that subsequent Friday afternoon, right after I had orchestrated a transfer of funds to mimic a diminished bank balance, where I confided in a measured tone about the mounting pressures at work and the possibility of needing to draw from emergency savings to cover essentials, to which she responded with a lighthearted dismissal that echoed her characteristic optimism, recounting her own entrepreneurial hurdles with the Etsy store she had launched a few years back as evidence that such trials ultimately forged unbreakable resilience, offering no concrete gesture of support like an invitation for a reassuring meal or even a simple inquiry into how she might alleviate the immediate burden. Undeterred, I encountered Jenna by chance at the local grocery store over the weekend, navigating the aisles filled with budget staples to reinforce the illusion of frugality, and during our brief exchange amid the fluorescent lights and canned goods, I alluded to the economic slowdown affecting my caseload and the creeping anxiety over accumulating bills that threatened to overwhelm my carefully maintained equilibrium, prompting her to express surface-level empathy with a sympathetic nod and a gentle squeeze of my arm while acknowledging the broader downturn that plagued so many in our region. Yet as our conversation drifted toward her upcoming social plans without any follow-through on assistance, such as a small loan or help with errands, I couldn't shake the undercurrent of disappointment that this lifelong friendship might prioritize convenience over crisis. By the following Monday, I escalated the experiment through a deliberately ambiguous message in our long-standing group chat that included Lisa, Mark, Jenna, and myself, vaguely alluding to challenging times looming on the horizon without specifying details to allow their instincts to guide their reactions. And it was Mark who replied almost immediately with an upbeat encouragement to maintain high spirits while suggesting we reconvene for inexpensive wings at our favorite dive bar sometime soon. A gesture that rang hollow in its vagueness, since it addressed neither the emotional toll nor the practical needs I had hinted at, leaving the thread to fizzle without further engagement from the others as they pursued their individual routines. That evening, alone in my kitchen with the lottery ticket preserved as a tangible memento of the deception's origin, I experienced a blend of simmering frustration and wry amusement at the predictability of human behavior under pressure, recognizing how these patterns mirrored the very betrayals that had hardened my resolve to conduct this trial in the first place. Yet an unexpected interruption arrived via an email from Mike, the reserved IT specialist at our firm who handles technical glitches with quiet efficiency and rarely initiates non-work-related interactions, inquiring whether I required assistance with organizing spreadsheets amid the rumored office turbulence. A seemingly innocuous overture that gave me pause since his awareness of my fabricated struggles suggested either keen observation or coincidental timing, stirring a flicker of curiosity about his unassuming presence in the periphery of my daily life. Later that same evening, driven by an impulse to intensify the test, I loaded a box of outdated tools from the attic into my car and drove unannounced to Mark's cluttered home on the outskirts of town. presenting them as surplus items I intended to offload in an effort to generate quick cash for impending shortfalls, to which he accepted the offering with mumbled gratitude while his expression betrayed a calculating gleam as he appraised the potential value for his own sporadic repair side gigs. In a bold move that blurred the lines of my pretense, Mark then requested a $50 advance for gas to fuel his weekend poker gathering with longtime acquaintances, a sum I provided without protest despite the irony of extending aid while simulating desperation, and as I departed his driveway under the dim glow of his porch light, he shouted a generic reassurance that I would weather the storm through sheer determination alone, words that landed with the weight of indifference rather than inspiration. Returning home through the winding rural roads, I permitted myself a low chuckle that carried both bitterness and dark humor at the absurdity of the scenario, contemplating the subtle ways I might orchestrate a fitting retaliation to underscore the inequities without prematurely unraveling the entire charade. Unbeknownst to me at that juncture, Mark had already begun weaving his own web of opportunism, as evidenced the next morning when I arrived at the office and caught fragments of his animated phone conversation near the water cooler with one of his repair shop colleagues, boasting about how his sister's impending misfortunes presented prime opportunities for acquiring undervalued possessions before her situation deteriorated further, a revelation that crystallized the escalating betrayal and propelled my resolve toward the confrontation brewing just beyond the horizon. Overhearing Mark's opportunistic chatter near the office water cooler that next morning sent a sharp jolt through me as I lingered just out of sight in the hallway shadows, pretending to fiddle with my coffee mug while absorbing every boastful detail about how he planned to capitalize on my fabricated downfall by snapping up my belongings at bargain prices before the situation supposedly spiraled beyond salvage. A tactic that not only confirmed the depth of his self-serving nature, but also ignited a fiercer determination within me to accelerate the pace of my experiment and expose the true colors of everyone involved without allowing their schemes to gain any real traction in the process. With that fresh betrayal fueling my steps, I dove deeper into the deception throughout the ensuing week by listing various household items for sale on local online marketplaces. Everything from outdated furniture pieces that had gathered dust in my spare room to inexpensive jewelry I had accumulated over years of modest indulgences, even staging the pawn of my old wedding ring, which I later redeemed quietly to maintain the illusion of irreversible loss, all designed to project an image of mounting desperation that would naturally elicit responses from those closest to me and reveal whether their concern extended beyond superficial platitudes. Jenna arrived at my doorstep on Thursday evening under the pretense of our routine catch-up session that we had maintained for over 2 decades through thick and thin. Yet I had meticulously prepared the house to align with the narrative of financial strain by clearing visible shelves to create an echo of emptiness and stacking printed mock notices of overdue bills on the kitchen counter where they could not be ignored during our conversation, allowing me to weave in details about the dire office slowdown and the looming threat of foreclosure that made my voice waver just enough to convey authenticity without overplaying the role. As we settled into the living room with glasses of inexpensive wine poured from a discount bottle to further sell the austerity, Jenna enveloped me in a hug that felt warm on the surface, but carried an undercurrent of hesitation when I elaborated on the severity of my predicament and hinted at the possibility of losing the very home we were sitting in if my professional caseload did not rebound soon, prompting her to offer nothing more substantial than a listening ear and vague encouragement about the cyclical nature of economic hardships while steering the discussion toward her own weekend itinerary, as if my crisis served merely as a backdrop for her anecdotes. A touch of wry humor surfaced in my mind as I observed her discomfort up close, considering how Jenna had so often treated my wardrobe as a communal resource by borrowing outfits for dates or events and returning them in various states of disarray without a second thought. Yet now when confronted with my simulated vulnerability, she suddenly invoked her own budgetary constraints as a barrier to any reciprocal gesture, transforming what could have been a moment of solidarity into a one-sided exchange that left me inwardly tallying the imbalances of our friendship with a mix of amusement and quiet resentment at the predictability of it all. Undaunted by her evasion, I pressed the test further the next day by encountering Tom, my longtime neighbor across the street who had retired from his mechanic days in his early 60s and spent most afternoons on his porch with a cold beverage in hand while reminiscing about the old times when life seemed simpler before his wife's passing left him in a quiet solitude much like my own after the divorce, deliberately staging a laborious scene in my front yard where I hauled miscellaneous boxes to the curb marked with handwritten free signs to draw his attention and initiate a natural conversation about my supposed need to declutter amid tightening finances. Tom ambled over with his usual unhurried gait, scratching at his stubbled chin as he surveyed the assortment of odds and ends, including an old bicycle frame that had rusted from disuse. And when I explained the tough circumstances forcing me to offload even sentimental items just to make room or perhaps generate a few dollars here and there, he expressed a measured sympathy laced with practicality by offering his physical assistance in transporting heavier pieces, if needed, but stopping short of any monetary support or deeper inquiry into how he might alleviate the broader pressures weighing on me. His gaze lingering a fraction too long on the bicycle as though already envisioning its potential restoration for his own garage projects rather than focusing on my evident distress. By Friday afternoon, the dynamics within our shared group chat had shifted into a subtle frenzy not driven by collective worry for my well-being, but rather by Lisa circulating unsolicited advertisements for debt management services and financial counseling programs that she framed as potentially life-saving resources tailored to my described plight. A gesture that rang insincere given how I had previously fronted the startup costs for her ill-fated bakery endeavor 3 years earlier without ever receiving acknowledgement beyond fleeting gratitude, underscoring once again the one-directional flow of aid that had characterized our sibling relationship for far too long. Mark followed up separately through a direct message inquiring about the status of my vehicle listings online and expressing interest in acquiring it should the price dip below $5,000 with the intention of reselling it for profit through his network of contacts at the auto shop, a proposal that carried the unmistakable scent of exploitation wrapped in familial concern and prompted me to respond with polite ambiguity while suppressing the urge to confront him outright about the duplicity I had overheard days prior. It was in this thickening web of calculated interactions that Mike re-emerged more prominently within the narrative of my unfolding test. Approaching my desk at the office with a freshly repaired laptop in tow and casually referencing the vague allusions to hardship I had shared in passing work discussions before extending an offer to cover the cost of lunch during our upcoming break as a low-key way to ease the day without imposing any obligations or expectations on my part. Over simple sandwiches eaten on a nearby park bench under the autumn sun filtering through the leaves, Mike opened up incrementally about his own background growing up in the adjacent town where he had navigated the early loss of his parents and balanced a demanding schedule that included a secondary evening job to support his younger sister's pursuit of higher education, articulating a philosophy of mutual support that emphasized continuing forward despite repeated disappointments from those who should have been reliable pillars in one's life, a perspective that resonated uncomfortably close to my concealed motivations and left me wondering if his attentiveness stemmed from genuine empathy or some unspoken awareness of my deeper game. I deflected the intensity of the moment with a self-deprecating quip about surviving on a regimen of optimism and whatever scraps the pantry still held, eliciting a soft chuckle from him that lightened the air momentarily. But as we concluded the meal and he discreetly pressed a $20 bill into my hand for future coffee runs, insisting it was no imposition at all, the gesture carried a weight that both warmed and unsettled me since it originated from someone whose own circumstances suggested he managed finances with meticulous care rather than extravagance, raising subtle questions about the origins of his compassion and whether it might conceal ulterior motives tied to the quiet observations he had made over our shared workplace tenure. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon casting long shadows across my living room, I initiated the first targeted act of retribution aimed not at Mike, whose intentions remained intriguingly opaque, but toward the more overt opportunists like Lisa, who had eagerly positioned herself to benefit from my pretense. Carefully concealing a cardboard box filled with outdated magazines and fabricated eviction documents dated for the immediate upcoming week within the cushions of the couch, she had requested for a nominal fee to accommodate her children's study needs. When her husband arrived the following Saturday morning to collect the item under the clear blue sky, I positioned myself discreetly at the window to witness his discovery as he rifled through the hidden contents, his expression shifting from casual satisfaction to visible alarm upon encountering the forged notices that painted a picture of imminent displacement, prompting him to call out to me with a tentative query about the authenticity of the situation while I maintained a composed facade of reluctant confirmation and suggested he resell the piece swiftly to offset any potential complications. Lisa followed up later that day with a phone call laced with uncharacteristic tremor in her voice, proposing belated assistance in the form of temporary storage solutions for my remaining belongings, as if the reality of my simulated peril had finally pierced her initial detachment. But by then the seed of doubt and discomfort had been planted through that clever maneuver which delivered a satisfying sting of reversal without compromising the overarching secrecy of my lottery windfall or the broader experiment still in motion. Yet, just as I savored the subtle triumph of that payback, my phone illuminated with an incoming message from Mark outlining arrangements for a group gathering at the local diner the next afternoon under the guise of discussing lucrative opportunities related to my ongoing sales efforts. An invitation that hinted at collaborative intentions, but carried the undercurrent of a coordinated effort involving Jenna and Tom as well, pulling me toward an encounter that promised to unravel further layers of alliance and deception in ways I could scarcely anticipate at that juncture. The familiar aroma of sizzling bacon and stale coffee enveloped me as I pushed through the diner's creaky door that Sunday morning, navigating past the cluster of regulars hunched over their newspapers and plates to spot the occupied booth in the far corner where Mark sat flanked by Jenna and Tom, their faces a mix of forced casualness and underlying calculation that immediately set my instincts on edge, while Lisa waved tentatively from a nearby table with her husband, turning what should have been a simple gathering into an impromptu assembly that felt more like an intervention scripted for my supposed benefit rather than a heartfelt show of solidarity in the midst of my fabricated crisis. Sliding into the worn vinyl seat across from Mark, who greeted me with an overly enthusiastic pat on the shoulder, I ordered a basic black coffee to anchor myself amid the rising tide of suspicion, allowing the steam to curl upward as they launched into their collective pitch about pooling resources to navigate my financial woes through a coordinated strategy that on the surface promised communal support, but beneath carried the unmistakable taint of self-preservation and opportunistic maneuvering designed to position them advantageously within the chaos they imagined I was enduring. Jenna took the lead with her animated gestures and wide-eyed sincerity, proposing a joint garage sale event that would leverage her flexible retail schedule to handle the logistics, while emphasizing how such an endeavor could maximize returns on my undervalued possessions without requiring me to shoulder the burden alone. A suggestion that Tom reinforced with his gruff affirmation of providing free hauling services, using his truck and tools accumulated from decades in the mechanic trade, yet as Lisa chimed in from her adjacent spot about knowing a reliable buyer interested in bulk purchases to streamline the process. I detected the subtle undercurrents of appraisal in their glances toward one another, as if they were already divvying up the spoils before any actual aid had materialized, transforming the meeting into a negotiation where my desperation served as the currency for their potential gains rather than a catalyst for unconditional assistance. We lingered over the meal for what stretched into a full hour, with me contributing measured nods and occasional elaborations on the invented severity of my office downturn, including dwindling client retainers and the specter of impending layoffs that necessitated dipping into retirement savings just to cover mortgage payments. But when the conversation veered toward practical next steps like co-signing a short-term loan to bridge the gap, Mark leaned forward with papers in hand outlining a group-backed application for $10,000 complete with fine print that allowed for their involvement in asset management should the need arise, a clause that screamed control more than compassion and prompted a dark humor to bubble within me at the irony of these very individuals whom I had propped up through their own string of misfortunes, now angling to oversee the liquidation of my life, as if it were a distressed inventory sale at the local flea market. Excusing myself briefly to the restroom where the harsh fluorescent lighting reflected back a woman whose resolve masked the churning uncertainty of whether this elaborate ruse had unearthed truths too painful to ignore or merely amplified my own cynicism into something destructive, I returned to the table with renewed composure to probe their motivations by inquiring why such organized help had only surfaced now after weeks of radio silence on their parts, eliciting shrugs from Mark about the value of family unity in tough times and murmurs from Jenna about the economy's unforgiving grip on everyone, yet no one volunteered to personally guarantee the loan or even review the documents with me privately to ensure fairness, leaving the air thick with unvoiced agendas that heightened the conflict simmering just below the polite exchanges. As the group dispersed into the parking lot under the overcast sky, Tom pulled me aside near my car with a low voice, offering his cousin's inexpensive rental property as a backup should the house become untenable, a pragmatic lifeline that carried a hint of genuine concern amid the opportunism, but still fell short of addressing the emotional isolation I had begun to feel acutely in the wake of their selective engagement, driving me homeward with a resolve to counter their encroachments through targeted repercussions that would sting without shattering the facade entirely. That afternoon, I invited Lisa over under the guise of seeking her counsel on the eviction notices I had strategically embedded in the couch delivery the day before. Watching as she arrived with visible unease etched into her features and her children trailing behind with distracted energy that filled my living room with temporary chaos, while she rifled through the fabricated documents with growing pallor, her questions tumbling out about the timeline and potential legal ramifications that could force an abrupt relocation far sooner than anticipated. Seizing the moment to deepen the test, I confided in exaggerated detail about the possibility of crashing temporarily with Mark to weather the storm, an idea that elicited immediate pushback from her about space constraints in her own home, despite the numerous occasions when I had opened mine to her family for extended stays during their various upheavals. And as she departed with assurances of brainstorming solutions, I followed up anonymously via email with a tip about a fast cash lending firm downtown known for its exorbitant rates but rapid approvals, a deliberate plant rooted in my knowledge of its predatory practices that would ensnare her curiosity and deliver a clever form of revenge by mirroring the superficial aid she had extended to me, all while maintaining the ambiguity of my true circumstances to keep the broader experiment intact. Monday brought a subtle twist through Mike's unannounced appearance at my desk with a bag of takeout from the corner deli, his quiet demeanor cutting through the office hum as he suggested sharing the meal in the empty conference room to discuss not just work files, but the personal strains I had alluded to in passing, allowing a rare glimpse into his motivations when pressed about why he chose to intervene on behalf of someone he interacted with so minimally outside professional necessities. Over the simple sandwiches and crisp autumn air seeping through the cracked window, Mike revealed fragments of his philosophy shaped by early losses and ongoing commitments to his siblings' education, emphasizing the importance of proactive kindness in a world quick to withdraw support when convenience waned, a stance that resonated with an uncomfortable authenticity and made me question whether his gestures arose from observed patterns in my behavior or a deeper intuition that skirted the edges of my deception without fully piercing it. Yet the evening unveiled a sharper conflict when Jenna phoned with a hushed urgency, disclosing Mark's behind-the-scenes scheming to undervalue and redistribute my listed items for personal profit under the cover of collaborative help, a betrayal that crystallized the growing rifts and forced me to confront the dilemma of either dismantling the alliances prematurely through direct confrontation or permitting the plot to unfold toward a more devastating revelation. As the week progressed, the isolation intensified with Tom's porch waves becoming more perfunctory and Lisa's single visit dissolving into excuses about her own mounting obligations from the ill-advised loan application I had indirectly steered her toward, prompting me to orchestrate another layer of witty retribution by recommending a financial advisor who specialized in high consultation fees for initial assessments, ensuring she incurred unnecessary expenses that echoed the burdens she had so casually overlooked in my narrative, a satisfying inversion that fueled the impending sense of reckoning without alerting the group to my hand in their discomforts. Tuesday night found me alone in the dim kitchen glow, scrolling through the group chat's escalating discussions about optimizing my so-called fire sale while nursing a glass of modest wine, when a firm knock echoed at the door, revealing Mike with his toolbox in tow. Having heard through office whispers about a malfunctioning garage door that he offered to repair on the spot without fanfare or expectation of thanks, his offhand remark during the task about how I reminded him of his late mother in my habitual generosity toward others, planting a subtle seed of connection that tied back to vague recollections from community service years ago and deepened the uncertainty surrounding his role in this tangled web. Heart pounding with a blend of gratitude and wariness as I watched him pack up under the porch light. The peace shattered moments later with an urgent voicemail from Mark summoning the entire circle back to the diner for what he described as critical news pertaining to my precarious future. A call that hung in the air like a storm cloud, promising revelations that could either vindicate my test or unravel it entirely in the face of their unified suspicions. Trust emerged as the operative word in Mark's voicemail that pulled me back to the diner under the gathering dusk of that Wednesday evening. A term that rang with hollow irony as I maneuvered my car into the crowded lot where the neon sign buzzed erratically against the encroaching twilight. Stepping inside to find the familiar booth commandeered once again by the full assembly, including Lisa's husband, who fidgeted with a soda can while the others exchanged glances heavy with unspoken agendas. That immediately amplified the undercurrent of conspiracy in what they framed as a rescue mission tailored specifically to avert my imagined spiral into destitution. Settling into the seat with a deliberate slowness that masked my accelerating pulse, I accepted the offered menu from Jenna, whose enthusiasm bordered on performative as she outlined their evolved plan to underwrite a collective loan application designed to inject immediate liquidity into my faltering circumstances, complete with endorsements from Tom's bank acquaintance and logistical support from Lisa to expedite approvals. Yet as Mark slid the preliminary documents across the scarred tabletop, their clauses jumped out like hidden snares, permitting the signatories broad latitude in overseeing and even directing the disposition of collateral assets should repayment falter, transforming the proposal from an act of benevolence into a veiled mechanism for consolidating control over my possessions under the guise of familial intervention. The air thickened with their justifications delivered in overlapping voices, Mark emphasizing the risks of solo borrowing in an unforgiving market, Jenna highlighting the emotional relief of shared responsibility after years of our intertwined histories, Tom grunting affirmations about practicalities drawn from his retirement wisdom, and Lisa interjecting about safeguarding against the eviction timeline that loomed in my fabricated narrative. Yet beneath the veneer of unity lurked the unmistakable scent of self-interest that made me inwardly scoff at the absurdity of these same people who had leaned on my resources during their personal tempests, from Jenna's post-divorce relocations to Mark's recurrent job losses, now positioning themselves as stewards of my downfall with eyes already gleaming toward the dividends they might extract from the arrangement. A wry amusement tempered my rising ire as I imagined the comical fallout if I revealed the truth mid-sentence, watching their faces contort from saviors to supplicants in an instant, but instead I adopted a tone of cautious gratitude while probing the timing of their sudden mobilization after prolonged inaction, eliciting deflections about recent realizations sparked by office rumors and community whispers that had coalesced into actionable resolve, though no one stepped forward to pledge individual guarantees or dissect the paperwork for exploitative loopholes, leaving me to navigate the dilemma of whether to feign acceptance and risk entanglement or reject it outright and fracture the test's delicate balance. As the meeting dissolved into tentative handshakes and promises of follow-up calls amid the diner's evening rush, Tom lingered by my vehicle in the cooling air to reiterate his rental option through his cousin as a safety net against total upheaval, a gesture that carried a modicum of uncalculated warmth amid the scheming, but still underscored the superficiality of their collective effort when stacked against the deeper voids it exposed in our bonds, propelling me homeward through the quiet streets where streetlights flickered to life like hesitant confidants. The following day, compelled by the mounting isolation and the enigmatic reliability of Mike's interventions, I orchestrated a direct confrontation during our after-hours walk to the nearby park where the benches overlooked a serene pond dotted with autumn leaves drifting lazily on the surface, articulating in measured vulnerability the escalation of my supposed woes, including a fabricated shortfall of $500 needed to stave off utility disconnections that threatened to compound the professional instability into full-blown crisis. Without a flicker of hesitation or probing questions that might betray doubt, Mike produced $300 from his wallet saved painstakingly from his supplementary evening shifts, pressing it into my palm with an insistence that brooked no refusal while sharing how such acts of forward-thinking support had sustained him through his own family's hardships. A revelation that intertwined with his earlier anecdotes about sibling obligations and painted him as a rare counterpoint to the opportunism swirling around me, yet it also deepened the moral crossroads gnawing at my conscience as I weighed the ethics of deceiving someone whose compassion appeared untainted by ulterior designs against the broader revelations my experiment aimed to unearth. That night, alone with the weight of the borrowed cash burning in my pocket like an accusation, the internal conflict intensified as I pondered the cost of perpetuating the charade. Had my quest for validation and loyalty morphed into a manipulative force that alienated potential allies like Mike while amplifying the pettiness of those failing the test, prompting audience-like judgments on my choices that mirrored the self-doubt creeping into my resolve amid the uncertainty of outcomes still unfolding? Seizing the momentum of betrayal, I enacted a precise retaliation against Mark by submitting an anonymous report to his auto shop supervisor detailing his diversion of work hours toward personal resale schemes gleaned from our interactions, a maneuver calibrated to trigger disciplinary scrutiny and temporary pay deductions without implicating myself directly, and when he phoned the next morning seething about the inexplicable reprimand that disrupted his routine, I responded with feigned commiseration laced with subtle irony about life's capricious twists that spared no one regardless of their intentions, deriving a quiet satisfaction from the witty reversal that echoed his own exploitative mindset back at him through bureaucratic channels. Jenna faced her corresponding comeuppance shortly thereafter when, after volunteering to manage listings for my staged online auctions, I inflated the starting bids to unattainable levels before abruptly withdrawing the items citing phantom glitches, resulting in a barrage of irate inquiries from prospective buyers that flooded her inbox and eroded her confidence in the collaborative venture she had championed, prompting a frantic text chain where she lamented the bad luck derailing our supposed joint effort while I replied with nonchalant assurances about technical gremlins mirroring the unpredictability of my fortunes. A light vulgarity in my private chuckle at the darned poetic justice of her enthusiasm rebounding as self-inflicted frustration. Yet the narrative twisted further that weekend as I sifted through archived boxes in the attic for additional props to bolster the deception, unearthing a bundle of letters from my ex-husband that chronicled not only the dissolution of our marriage but also a long-standing unpaid debt to Mike's late father stemming from a business venture gone awry years before we met. A hidden family secret that reframed Mike's persistent helpfulness as potentially motivated by lingering obligations or unspoken vendettas rather than pure altruism, injecting a layer of ambiguity that made his $300 feel like both a lifeline and a liability in the escalating web of connections I had unwittingly revived. Lisa confronted me directly on Sunday afternoon after her entanglement with the predatory lender I had subtly directed her toward began unraveling through escalating fees and opaque terms that drained her limited reserves, arriving at my door with accusations veiled as concern about the advisor's upfront charges that had caught her off guard despite my recommendation framed as a benevolent shortcut, to which I countered with sympathetic platitudes about the pitfalls of hasty decisions in desperate times while inwardly reveling in the clever symmetry of her predicament reflecting the aid she had withheld from me. As tension simmered across the group communications with Mark venting about workplace sabotage and Jenna fretting over the auction mishaps that hinted at coordinated misfortune, An unidentified call pierced the evening calm with Mike's voice requesting an urgent discussion about elements from our shared past that demanded clarification, a plea that hung unresolved as another. Knock resounded moments later, revealing Lisa on the threshold clutching official-looking documents. Her expression a storm of accusation as she declared that the loan intermediary had flagged inconsistencies in my financial profile, suggesting assets far more substantial than the narrative I had spun, teetering my carefully guarded secret on the brink of catastrophic exposure. Assets became the focal point of Lisa's urgent declaration as she thrust the sheaf of loan documents toward me on the dimly lit porch, where the evening chill wrapped around us like an uninvited witness to the unraveling of secrets I had guarded with such meticulous care, her voice laced with a volatile blend of familial concern and simmering accusation, while Mark's headlights swept the driveway behind her, illuminating Jenna's tense silhouette in the passenger seat and Tom's solitary figure approaching on foot from the sidewalk, transforming the quiet neighborhood into a stage for an impromptu tribunal that threatened to dismantle the entire architecture of my experiment in one fell swoop of collective scrutiny. Ushering them inside with a composure born from the adrenaline surging through my veins, I directed the group toward the living room, where the staged austerity of cleared surfaces and shadowed corners now felt like props in a farce on the verge of exposure. Settling into the armchair as they arrayed themselves on the sofa and chairs with expressions ranging from Lisa's furrowed brow of betrayal to Mark's blustering indignation and Jenna's wide-eyed confusion, all while Tom hovered near the doorway, nursing an air of reluctant involvement that mirrored his peripheral role throughout the ordeal. With the weight of their expectant stares pressing down, I drew a steadying breath and unveiled the truth in a measured cadence that began with the lottery win 3 months prior. A staggering $25 million claimed through anonymous channels and nested in impenetrable trusts. Watching as gasps rippled through the room like aftershocks, Jenna's hand flying to her mouth in disbelief, Mark's jaw slackening into stunned silence, and Lisa whispering a disbelieving negation that hung in the air before dissolving into the broader wave of comprehension that this revelation reframed every interaction of the past weeks as a deliberate orchestration on my part to probe the authenticity of their loyalties amid apparent adversity. The ensuing barrage of reactions cascaded in a chaotic symphony of defenses and indictments, Mark sputtering about the sheer audacity of such a deception that had manipulated their goodwill into unwitting complicity, Jenna dissolving into tears that spoke of shattered trust after decades of shared confidences now tainted by suspicion of ulterior motives, Lisa railing against the emotional toll of fabricated vulnerability that had preyed on her maternal instincts and familial bonds, and even Tom muttering about the waste of time and energy that could have fostered genuine support if honesty had prevailed from the outset. Yet beneath their protests lay the undeniable undercurrent of self-recrimination for the opportunistic tendencies my test had illuminated, from Mark's resale schemes to Lisa's hasty loan pursuits and Jenna's selective empathy, forcing me to navigate the internal conflict of whether my quest for unvarnished truth had crossed into cruelty that alienated even those with flickering potential for redemption, while evoking a judgmental empathy from observers who might condemn my manipulative choices as much as they pitied the fallout. A touch of dark humor surfaced in my response as I acknowledged the irony of their indignation given the one-sided ledger of past favors I had extended without fanfare, covering Jenna's therapy bills during her grief-stricken phase, jump-starting Tom's truck through winter storms, and absorbing Lisa's entrepreneurial debacles with quiet infusions of capital, phrases like, "darned if it doesn't feel like a mirror to your own hustles," slipping out with a wry edge that diffused some tension but amplified the growing rift as they grappled with the reversal of roles where I now held the power to expose or forgive at will. Amid the verbal crossfire, I wove in the pivotal twist regarding Mike, whose interventions had stood as the solitary counterpoint to their faltering, disclosing how his family's historical entanglement with my ex-husband through an unresolved debt from a long-defunct business partnership might explain the depth of his unsolicited aid. A connection unearthed from forgotten letters that suggested his $300 and garage repairs could stem from a sense of inherited obligation rather than disinterested compassion. planting seeds of ambiguity that made even his reliability suspect in the eyes of the group, while stirring my own uncertainties about whether true altruism existed untainted by past shadows, or if every gesture carried invisible strings waiting to pull. As the accusations peaked with Lisa demanding assurances that no further manipulations lurked in the wings and Mark threatening to sever ties unless reparations followed, I orchestrated the culminating act of retribution by directing their attention to the loan documents they had co-signed in good faith, revealing the embedded addendums I had forged to redirect any disbursements toward an anonymous charity in my name, along with clauses that would trigger substantial processing fees and credit inquiries upon activation. A clever trap that would ensnare them in bureaucratic quicksand come Monday morning when the bank scrutinized the irregularities and imposed penalties mirroring the superficial assistance they had proffered, delivering a final witty sting that punished their greed without direct confrontation and left them stewing in the consequences of their conditional loyalties. Tom broke the stunned hush with a subdued admission of his limited intentions, focused solely on practical aid like the rental offer, prompting a momentary softening in my stance as I conceded that his efforts, though modest, had edged closer to sincerity than the others' elaborate schemes. Yet as the group filtered out into the night with fractured promises of future dialogues and awkward embraces that rang false against the backdrop of betrayal, the impending solitude settled over me like a heavy fog, compounded by Mike's unanswered text about delving into our intertwined histories that now loomed as either an olive branch or a reckoning, depending on the truths yet unspoken. In the days that followed, the repercussions unfolded predictably, with Lisa's tearful voicemail seeking forgiveness amid her own financial entanglements, Mark's abrupt radio silence that spoke volumes about wounded pride, Jenna's tentative memes attempting to rebuild bridges through levity, and Tom's daily waves from his porch carrying a newfound distance that underscored the irreparable cracks, while my encounters with Mike evolved into cautious coffees where conversations skirted the edges of revelation without full disclosure, his knowing glances hinting at an understanding that transcended the experiment and forced me to confront the dilemma of extending trust to someone whose motives blurred the line between benevolence and settlement. Ultimately, the $25 million remained largely untouched in its secure vaults, a silent testament to the hollowness of windfalls unshared and the heavier cost of isolation chosen over vulnerability, leaving me to ponder in quiet evenings whether the test had affirmed my cynicism or merely amplified it into a self-fulfilling prophecy that isolated me further from the messy authenticity of human connections, with unanswered questions lingering about Mike's true intentions and the fragile nature of loyalty in a world where help often arrives laced with expectations. Reflect on your own circle as the story fades, who among them would stand firm if the facade crumbled, or does the mere possibility of such a trial reveal more about us than those we test, inviting a lingering ambiguity that challenges assumptions long after the final revelation?